I never thought that a simple trip to visit my cousin would turn into a nightmare. It all started when I decided to go to a small village in the middle of nowhere. The village, named Black Hollow, was said to be a place of mystery and strange happenings. People who lived there were quiet, often keeping to themselves. It was far from the city, and it felt like the kind of place you would only visit if you had no other choice. My cousin Sarah had moved there a year ago to escape the noise and chaos of the city. She had always been a little different, preferring the peace of nature over the busy streets. When she invited me to visit, I didn't think much of it. I packed my bags, caught a bus, and headed to Black Hollow, thinking I would just have a quiet weekend away. As I got off the bus, the village seemed peaceful at first. The air was fresh, the sky clear, and the houses were old but well kept. The streets were narrow, with only a few cars driving by, but there was something off about the place. It felt too quiet, like no one was ever really there, even though I knew people lived there. The trees around the village were tall, their branches hanging low like they were trying to block out the sun. Sarah greeted me with a warm smile when I arrived at her house. Her home was on the edge of the village, near the woods. She was happy to see me and told me I would love it there, that everything was calm and peaceful. But as she spoke, I couldn't help but notice the way her eyes darted around, as if she was looking for something, or someone. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. "Oh, I'm fine," Sarah quickly replied, waving her hand as if to brush off my question. "Let's go inside. I've made dinner." But something about her response didn't sit right with me. I followed her into the house, trying to ignore the feeling that the village around me was hiding something dark. As the evening went on, I tried to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. We had dinner, chatted, and caught up on old times, but the strange feeling only grew stronger. It was as if the walls were closing in on me, the silence in the house becoming heavier with every passing minute. Every now and then, I thought I heard footsteps outside the house, but when I looked, no one was there. After dinner, Sarah and I went for a walk. She said she wanted to show me the woods behind her house. As we walked deeper into the trees, I noticed that the atmosphere had changed. The air grew colder, and a fog started to roll in. The path we were walking on seemed to stretch endlessly, and there was an eerie stillness in the air, like the world was holding its breath. "Sarah, do you feel that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She stopped walking, her face pale. "We shouldn't be out here. We need to go back." I was confused. "Why? What's wrong?" She shook her head, looking around nervously. "I don't want to talk about it. Just trust me. We need to go home." Her voice was shaking now. I didn't argue. We turned around and hurried back toward the house, but the walk back felt longer than it should have. The fog had thickened, and the trees seemed to be closing in on us, their twisted branches reaching out like claws. When we finally made it back to the house, Sarah locked the door behind us. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to scare you." "It's okay," I replied, trying to hide my own fear. "But what's going on here? You're acting strange." Sarah sat down on the couch, her hands trembling. "This village, it's not what it seems. People don't stay here for long. If you live here, you learn things you wish you never knew. The woods, they're not just trees, and the village, it's cursed." I felt my heart race. "Cursed? What do you mean?" She looked out the window, her eyes distant. "There's a reason no one leaves Black Hollow. People come here, and then they disappear. No one knows why. It's been like this for as long as I can remember." I didn't know what to say. I had thought Sarah was just feeling a little too isolated from the world, but now I wasn't so sure. The village definitely felt strange, and the way she was speaking made it all seem real. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. It was a quick, sharp sound, like someone was in a hurry. Sarah froze, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't answer it," she whispered. I didn't even have time to react. The door opened slowly, and standing in the doorway was an old man. He was tall and thin, with a long gray beard and eyes that seemed to have seen things no one should ever see. He looked at me with a cold gaze, and then turned to Sarah. "You shouldn't have brought him here. the man said in a low voice. His tone was unsettling, like he knew something terrible was about to happen. Sarah stood up, her face pale. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. You thought you could escape," the old man interrupted. "But no one escapes Black Hollow." The old man's words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to speak, to ask him what he meant, but my mouth felt dry, and I couldn't find my voice. Sarah seemed to shrink under his gaze, her shoulders hunched like she was trying to hide from him. The man stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He didn't ask for permission, didn't knock again. He just came in as if he belonged here. His presence was overpowering, filling the room with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. Every step he took made the air feel thicker, heavier. "You've brought him here, Sarah," the old man repeated, his voice even colder now. "I warned you. The village knows when there's an outsider. The curse, it doesn't care who you are. It will take you." "Take me?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. "What are you talking about?" The old man turned his head to look at me. His eyes were so dark they looked like pits, endless and empty. "You'll find out soon enough. It's already begun." Before I could ask more questions, he turned to Sarah, ignoring me completely. "You know what you have to do. You must leave this place before it's too late." I can't," Sarah whispered, shaking her head. "I've tried. Every time it pulls me back. There's no escape." The man sighed, as though this was a conversation he'd had many times before. "You'll never be free. Not until it's done with you." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. I was trying to make sense of everything, but none of it added up. A curse? People disappearing? What was he talking about? "Who are you?" I finally asked, my voice trembling. "And what do you mean people disappear?" The old man's lips curled into a thin, grim smile. "I'm just another soul trapped in this village like the rest. I've seen it happen over and over again. People come here drawn by something they can't explain, and they never leave. You've come here because you were meant to. You'll learn the truth, sooner or later." I could see the pain in Sarah's eyes now, deep, hollow pain. Whatever this village was, whatever its secret was, it was slowly destroying her. She had been trying to fight it, but it had already taken hold of her. I didn't know what I could do to help her, or even if there was anything left to help. "I have to go," I said, standing up, my heart pounding. "I need to leave right now." But as I moved toward the door, something stopped me. I felt it. The air grew thick, like a weight had settled on my chest. I couldn't breathe properly. It was as though the very room was pushing against me, and the door in front of me felt miles away. "You can't leave," the old man said softly, his voice dripping with finality. "No one leaves Black Hollow." The words echoed in my mind, sending a wave of panic through me. I turned to Sarah, desperate for an explanation. "Sarah, what's going on? Please, tell me what this is all about." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want you to get caught up in this. I didn't want you to be part of it. But now, it's too late. We're both trapped here." I felt my heart race. The sense of danger was growing stronger, and my instincts were screaming at me to get out of this house. The old man, who had turned his back to me, his hands folded in front of him. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What's happening to us? What do you want from us?" The old man slowly turned to face me. His eyes were even darker now, like the shadows themselves had consumed him. "I want nothing. The village wants you. It doesn't care who you are, where you came from, or why you came here. It takes what it wants, and it doesn't let go. Please tell me what to do," I begged, my voice shaking. "Is there any way to stop it?" He smiled again, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the smile of someone who had given up long ago, someone who knew there was no escaping the inevitable. "There's only one way to escape the curse," the old man said, his voice lower now, barely above a whisper. "But it comes at a price, a heavy price." "What price?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "You must offer something in exchange, something valuable," he replied. "It could be anything, your soul, your memories, your life. The village will take whatever it desires. It has to." "Is that what happened to Sarah?" I asked, my voice filled with dread. "Did the village take something from her?" The old man didn't respond immediately. He just stared at Sarah, his eyes filled with pity. "It's already taken her," he said quietly. "Her time here is almost up. There's nothing left to give." I turned to Sarah, my heart breaking for her. She looked so lost, so helpless. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled as she stared at the ground, avoiding my gaze. I realized then that whatever had taken hold of her wasn't just some simple curse. It was something far more powerful, something that had consumed her entire being. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fight something like this, but I couldn't just sit here and watch her suffer. I had to do something, anything to save her. The old man seemed to sense my resolve. "You can try to fight it, but it will cost you. Just know that." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving us alone in the room. The fog outside had thickened, and the night seemed to stretch on forever. I looked at Sarah again. "I'm not leaving you here," I said firmly. "I don't care what it costs. I'm not leaving without you." She shook her head slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't understand. You can't fight the village. It doesn't care about your will. It doesn't care about anything but taking what it wants." But as she spoke those words, something inside me snapped. I refused to believe that. There had to be a way to break free. I wouldn't let her go through this alone. The night outside was pitch black now, the fog so thick it seemed to smother everything around us. The world outside the house felt like a shadow, a dark, suffocating place. I could feel the weight of the curse on me, pressing in from all sides, but I wasn't going to give in, not yet. I grabbed Sarah by the arm. "We can't just sit here waiting for whatever this is to take you," I said, trying to steady my voice, though it was shaking with fear. "We need to do something. There has to be a way to stop this." She pulled her arm away gently, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I wish there was, but there isn't. I've tried everything. I've begged the village to let me go, but it doesn't listen. It's already decided." The old man's words echoed in my mind. The village takes what it wants. But I couldn't accept that. There had to be something we could do. I thought back to what he said about the curse. He mentioned that there was a price, something valuable in exchange. But what could we offer? What did the village want from us? I wasn't about to give up without figuring it out. "Maybe the old man knows something we don't," I said, my mind racing. "Maybe he knows how to stop it." Sarah shook her head again. "He's not here to help. He's part of the curse too. He's been trapped in this village for years, and he knows there's no way out." I felt a surge of frustration. "Then we have to make our own way out. I'm not leaving without you." I grabbed my jacket from the chair, determined to find some way to break free from this nightmare. Sarah looked at me, but she didn't stop me. Instead, she just sighed, as if she had already accepted her fate. The door creaked as I opened it, the cold air rushing in. The fog outside seemed even denser now, as if the very earth itself was trying to swallow us whole. I stepped out onto the porch, trying to steady myself against the unease that clawed at my chest. Every instinct told me to turn back, to get in the safety of the house, but I couldn't. I wouldn't let fear control me. I turned to Sarah, who stood hesitantly in the doorway. "Are you coming?" I asked, my voice tight. She looked down at the ground for a moment, then nodded. "I'll go with you," she whispered. "But you don't know what you're getting into. You don't know how deep this curse runs." I didn't care. I couldn't let her stay in this place any longer. We walked out into the mist, the path before us barely visible. It was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my chest, the only sound in the world. We walked for what felt like hours, the trees looming over us like dark, twisted giants, their branches stretching out like skeletal arms. Every few steps I thought I saw shadows moving just at the edge of my vision, but when I looked, nothing was there. "Sarah," I whispered, "where are we going?" She didn't answer immediately, her face pale in the dim light of the fog. "We have to go to the center of the village," she said softly. "That's where it all started. That's where the heart of the curse is." I nodded, even though I didn't understand. The center of the village. the place where it all began. We had to find answers, and if there was any hope of breaking the curse, it was there. As we walked further, the silence became unbearable. The air grew colder, and the fog thicker. It was like we were being swallowed by the village itself, the path narrowing until there was barely any room to move. I could feel something watching us, something lurking just out of sight. The trees seemed to grow closer with every step, the branches twisting like fingers reaching for us. "Sarah, I'm scared," I admitted, my voice trembling. She stopped walking, her eyes wide with fear. "I know, I'm scared too, but we have no choice. We have to face it." She turned and continued walking, leading the way through the fog. I followed closely behind, my eyes darting around, trying to make out anything in the mist. It felt like we were moving through a nightmare, each step dragging us deeper into something we couldn't escape. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the center of the village. It was an old stone circle, hidden behind a cluster of overgrown trees. The stones were weathered and cracked, some of them almost completely buried under the earth. It looked like some ancient altar, a place where rituals had been performed long before we were born, but the air around it was heavy, thick with something dark and oppressive. "This is it," Sarah whispered. "This is where it all began." I looked around, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do here? What were we supposed to find? The stones were covered in moss, but there was something strange about them. The air felt charged, like something was pulsing beneath the ground. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the mist. It wasn't Sarah's voice. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was a low, guttural voice, coming from all directions at once. "You shouldn't have come," the voice said, the words sending a chill down my spine. "You can't undo what's been done. You are part of it now. There's no going back." I froze. The voice was everywhere, surrounding us, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. The fog thickened around us, and I could feel something sinister closing in. "Sarah, what is that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. But Sarah wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the stones, her face blank. She didn't respond. It was as if she was no longer here, no longer with me. It was like the village had taken her already. I reached out, shaking her by the shoulder. "Sarah, snap out of it." She turned to me slowly, her eyes empty and hollow. "It's too late," she said, her voice eerily calm. "We can't leave now, it's already decided." Before I could say anything else, the ground beneath us began to shake. The stones in the circle shifted, and something began to rise from beneath them. The fog parted, revealing a figure standing in the center of the circle. It was the old man, but his appearance was different now. His face was twisted, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He looked like something ancient, something powerful, and he was staring at me with the same cold, pitiless gaze. "You should never have come here," he said again, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "Now you will join us." The old man stood at the center of the stone circle, his dark eyes glowing like they were burning with some unnatural light. His form seemed to ripple in the fog, as if he wasn't fully real. I could barely breathe as the air grew thick with the weight of his presence. "You should never have come here," he repeated, his voice cold, like the wind that howled through the trees. "You thought you could escape, but now it's too late. You are already part of this place. The village has chosen you." My heart hammered in my chest, and I could feel the darkness creeping in, suffocating everything around me. The fog seemed to pulse, alive, wrapping around my body like tendrils. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as if the ground itself was holding me in place, trapping me. "No," I gasped, my voice cracking. "I won't be part of this. I won't let it take me." But the old man just smiled, his lips curling in a way that sent a cold shiver down my spine. His smile was full of pity, but it wasn't for me, it was for himself. "It's not up to you anymore. It's up to the village." Sarah stood motionless beside me, her eyes vacant, her face drained of all emotion. It was like she wasn't even there. She had already given herself to the village, and now, The curse was claiming me as well. I could feel it closing in, its dark tendrils wrapping around my soul, pulling me deeper into its grasp. "Sarah," I cried, shaking her again, "please fight this. Don't let it take you." She didn't respond, her body stiff and unyielding. I could see the struggle in her eyes, but it was fading fast. Whatever the village was doing to her, it was working. The light in her eyes was dimming, and I knew it wouldn't be long before she was completely lost to the darkness. "No," I whispered, my voice thick with fear and desperation. "I can't lose you. Not like this." The old man laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "It's already done. The village always gets what it wants. You can't fight it. It's stronger than you could ever imagine." I looked around, my mind spinning. There had to be something I could do. I wasn't going to just stand here and let the village claim me, like it had claimed Sarah. The curse had already taken so much from her. There had to be a way to stop it before it took me. The fog thickened around us, swirling in a pattern that made my head spin. The stones in the circle began to glow, their dark energy pulsing in rhythm with my own racing heart. And then I heard it, a faint whisper in the air. At first I thought it was just the wind, but it was too clear, too deliberate. "Sacrifice." The word echoed in my mind, a single terrifying thought. A sacrifice. I remembered the old man's words, the price. The village demanded something in exchange. I thought it was asking for our lives, but now I realized it was asking for more. I turned to Sarah, desperation flooding my veins. "Sarah, listen to me," I shouted. "We have to do something. We have to find a way to stop this. We can't let it take everything from us." She blinked slowly, as though waking from a dream. Her eyes focused on me, but they were still hollow, the life drained from them. For a moment, I thought she might speak, but instead, she just nodded, her voice low and broken. "I don't know how," she whispered. "I've tried everything. The village won't let us." The fog around us seemed to darken, pressing in on me, suffocating me. I could feel the power of the village, the force that held us both in its grip. But then, as I looked at the old man, a thought crossed my mind. There was a way to fight this. If the village wanted a sacrifice, then maybe we could give it something else, something that wasn't our lives. But what? I glanced at the stones in the circle, their dark energy crackling in the air. My mind raced. The village wanted a sacrifice, a price. But perhaps it didn't need our souls or our lives. Maybe there was something else we could offer. The old man's eyes watched me closely, as though he could hear my thoughts. "You can't escape it," he said again, his voice growing stronger, more menacing. "This place is a prison for those who enter. It will never let you leave." I felt a sudden surge of determination, like a spark of defiance deep inside me. I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't going to let this village take me or Sarah. What if? I started, my voice trembling but growing stronger. What if the price is something else? The old man's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something. Doubt? Surprise? I wasn't sure, but it was enough to make me push forward. "I don't have to give you my life," I said, my voice gaining confidence. "I can give you something else." The old man's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in his gaze. "You cannot change the terms. The price is set." I stepped forward, closer to the circle. The air around me felt charged with energy, and the fog parted just enough for me to see the stones in full. They weren't just stones, they were symbols, ancient runes carved deep into the rock. Each one seemed to glow with its own power, pulsing in the dim light. Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand on one of the stones. It was cold, colder than anything I had ever felt, but it felt like the right thing to do. As my hand touched the stone, a rush of energy surged through me, and I gasped in pain. The world around me spun. The fog thickened, the whispers grew louder, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if I was still in the village or somewhere else entirely. I felt myself being pulled, dragged, as though the very earth was swallowing me whole. Then I heard it, the voice. "The price has been paid." I looked up, And in that moment, I realized that the price had not been my life or Sarah's. It wasn't a soul, it was something far more valuable. The village had taken what it wanted, but it wasn't us. It had taken our memories. I gasped as the realization hit me. The village had taken the very essence of who we were, the memories of our pasts, the moments that defined us. In exchange, it had released us, but I wasn't sure if we were free, or if the curse would follow us wherever we went. As I stood there, my hand still pressed against the cold stone, I felt a strange emptiness settle over me. It was like something important had been taken from me, something I couldn't fully grasp, yet I could feel it was gone. Sarah stood beside me, her face still pale, her eyes vacant. The fog around us seemed to pull back, as if the village itself had decided to give us one last chance to leave. The old man watched us with an unreadable expression, his dark eyes still glowing in the mist. He didn't move, but there was a change in the air. Something shifted. I could sense that the village, the curse, whatever it was waiting for us to make a choice. I turned to Sarah, my heart pounding. "Do you remember?" I asked quietly, afraid to hear the answer. She blinked slowly, then shook her head, her eyes empty. "I don't know, I feel like something is missing, but I can't remember what." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Our memories, the price the village had taken wasn't just our lives or souls, it had stolen our pasts, our identities. It had erased the things that made us who we were. But we were still alive. We were still here, and in that moment, I realized that we had a choice. We could leave this cursed village. We could walk away, even if it meant leaving behind the people we used to be. "Let's go," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "Let's just go." I didn't look back at the old man or the stones. I didn't need to. We had already given them what they wanted, and now it was time for us to leave. We walked through the fog, the village silent behind us. The weight of the curse felt lighter now, as though the village had finally let go of its grip on us. But the emptiness inside me remained. The memories I'd lost would never come back, not fully. The person I had been, the things I had known, those were gone, and they would never return. We kept walking, one step in front of the other, until we reached the edge of the village. I didn't look back, and neither did Sarah. We couldn't. The fog began to thin, and the cold night air started to feel more familiar, less oppressive. The village behind us disappeared into the mist, as if it was never there at all. But I knew better. I knew that Black Hollow would always be there, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to wander into its grasp. And as we walked away, I realized that the village had won. It had taken everything it wanted, our memories, our pasts, the very essence of who we had been. But it hadn't taken everything. It hadn't taken our will to survive. It hadn't taken our choice to leave. We were free, but we weren't whole. We would never be the same again. And Black Hollow, that cursed village, would live on, waiting for the next lost soul to enter its depths. I glanced at Sarah one last time. She was walking beside me, silent and distant, her eyes still hollow, but her footsteps steady. We would keep walking, and maybe, one day, we would find new memories, new lives. But Black Hollow would always be a shadow in the back of our minds, a reminder of the price we had paid to leave. And as the fog continued to swirl behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that the village would never truly let go. It had taken what it needed, but it would always be there, waiting, watching, for those who wandered too far. The curse was never truly broken. It was just postponed. I was traveling alone through the countryside, enjoying the fresh air and peaceful scenery. My plan was simple: find a quiet place to stay for the night and continue my journey the next morning. But fate had something else planned for me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized I had lost my way. My phone had no signal, and the nearest town was miles away. I walked for hours until I saw a small village in the distance. The houses looked old, their wooden walls worn out by time. A thick mist covered the streets, making it hard to see beyond a few feet. I entered the village, hoping to find someone who could help me. Strangely, there were no people outside, no children playing, no voices, no movement. The silence was unsettling. I knocked on the door of the first house I saw. No answer. I tried another house. Still nothing. It felt like the entire village was abandoned. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed an old woman standing at the end of the street. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and her eyes were empty, as if she had seen something horrifying. Slowly, she raised her hand and pointed at me. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared into the fog. A chill ran down my spine. Something was wrong with this place, but I had nowhere else to go. I decided to spend the night in the village and leave first thing in the morning. That was my biggest mistake. I was alone through the countryside, enjoying the fresh air and peaceful scenery. My plan was simple: find a quiet place to stay for the night and continue my journey the next morning. But fate had something else planned for me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized I had lost my way. My phone had no signal, and the nearest town was miles away. I walked for hours until I saw a small village in the distance. The houses looked old, their wooden walls worn out by time. A thick mist covered the streets, making it hard to see beyond a few feet. I entered the village, hoping to find someone who could help me. Strangely, there were no people outside. No children playing, no voices, no movement. The silence was unsettling. I knocked on the door of the first house I saw. No answer. I tried another house. Still, nothing. It felt like the entire village was abandoned. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed an old woman standing at the end of the street. She was staring at me. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and her eyes were empty, as if she had seen something horrifying. Slowly, she raised her hand and pointed at me. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared into the fog. A chill ran down my spine. Something was wrong with this place, but I had nowhere else to go. I decided to spend the night in the village and leave first thing in the morning. That was my biggest mistake. I walked deeper into the village and found an old inn. Its wooden sign creaked in the wind, barely hanging onto rusted chains. The door was unlocked, so I stepped inside. The air smelled of damp wood and something else, something rotten. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed, but no one answered. The furniture was covered in dust, and the candles on the tables had melted into strange shapes. It looked like no one had stayed here in years. Still, I was too tired to care. I found a small room upstairs and locked the door behind me. The bed was hard, but at least it was a place to rest. As I lay down, I heard whispering outside my door. My heart started pounding. I held my breath and listened carefully. The whispers were faint, like a conversation just beyond my understanding. Slowly, I got up and moved toward the door. The moment I placed my ear against the wood, the whispers stopped. Silence filled the room. Then suddenly, bang! Something slammed against the door. Awkward, my hands shaking. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body was frozen in fear. Slowly, the door handle twisted. I grabbed a chair and held it like a weapon. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. No sound, no movement. I waited for what felt like an eternity before gathering the courage to open the door. The hallway was empty, but deep in the darkness, I saw something move. A shadow, tall, thin, and unnatural. I slammed the door shut and locked it again. Sleep was impossible that night. At sunrise, I left the inn as fast as I could. I needed to find someone, anyone, who could tell me what was happening. I finally saw a man standing near an old well in the center of the village. His back was turned, and he didn't move when I approached. "Excuse me," I said. "Can you help me? I'm lost." The man slowly turned around, and I felt my stomach drop. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his lips twisted into an unnatural grin. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. I stepped back, but he grabbed my arm with an icy grip. "The village is cursed. Leave before it's too late." "What happened here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His smile vanished. "Long ago, the villagers angered something they shouldn't have. A dark spirit. It took their souls, leaving only shadows behind. Now anyone who stays too long becomes one of them." I yanked my arm free and ran. I didn't care if the story was true, I just wanted to get out of there. But the mist was thicker now. No matter which way I went, I ended up back in the village. It was like an endless loop, trapping me inside. Then, I heard them, the whispers from last night. But this time, they were all around me. Shadows moved in the fog, circling closer. Faces appeared, faces of the villagers, their eyes hollow, their grins unnatural. They reached for me. I screamed and ran into the nearest house. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my chest heaving. Through the cracks in the walls, I saw them waiting outside. They didn't need to rush. They knew I was trapped. I had become part of the village. I tried everything. I ran, I hid, I screamed for help. But no one came. As night fell, the shadows grew stronger. I could feel them inside my mind, whispering, calling my name. My body was weak, my thoughts slipping away. I don't know how long I have left. If someone finds this, please, never enter this village. Once you're here, you never leave. The cursed village always finds its next victim, and now, it has found